Welcome to this lesson on factoring using the greatest common factor, GCF. Now, the greatest common factor is when we have two numbers, for instance, and we want to think of the highest number that both of these can be divisible by. If you think of 4 and 8, well, they're both even, so I know they both can be divisible by 2. But is that the greatest? No. The greatest common factor they would have would be 4. I can divide each of them by 4 evenly. That didn't work. 4 would be our greatest common factor here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a few examples. And so as you're doing the assignment, if you need to look at an example, I'm going to power through a bunch of them in this video. So hopefully you can find the one you might need. Now, factoring using the greatest common factor, you're not going to see problems like this, but you've seen something like this before where you know how to distribute the 3x to both terms, and where you'd have 12x squared plus, you get 3x times 2, you get plus 6x. You're going to see something like this, and you're going to want to factor it, take out common factors and common terms, so that it looks something like the top part. So for instance, let's look at this example, 9x plus 12. We want to figure out what is the greatest common factor between 9 and 12. Well, the highest number they both can be divisible by is 3. Okay, they don't both have an x, so I can't pull the x out. So that's the greatest common factor that I can divide both terms by. So if I took 9 divided by 3, I would be left with 3x. Plus, if I did 12 divided by 3, I would be left with 4. Now, if you want to double check your answer to see if it's correct, this is our factored form here. Okay, if you want to check your answer, well, then just distribute. 3 times 3x, well, that's 9x. 3 times 4 plus 12, is that the same as the original? Why, yes, it is. So you know this is our factored form by taking out the greatest common factor. Now again, I'm powering through a bunch of examples. If you need to skip through the video to find the example you like, feel free to do that. Let's factor 6x squared plus 18. Well, the greatest common factor between 6 and 18. I know they both have 3 in common. I can divide them both by 3. Can I go any higher? Yes. I can divide them both by 6. So if I factor the 6 out, I would be left with x squared plus 18 divided by 6 would be 3. So if I wanted to check my answer, I could distribute it back. I'd get 6x squared. 6 times 3 is plus 18. It matches. So here is my factored form. All right, now we have both terms have x's involved. And when we're looking for the greatest common factor, we're looking for the lowest amount of terms, variable terms, x terms that they have in common. So this says 12x times x, that's what x to the second power is, plus 24x. So if we start with 12 and 24, the greatest common factor between those two terms would be 12. And now if I look for the x's, how many x's do they have in common? Well, this one has 2 and this one has 1. So they have 1 in common. So I'm going to factor that out with the 12x, and I'm going to leave it outside of the parentheses. So if I take 12x out, I'm left with x. And if I took 12x away from 24x, well, 24 divided by 12 would be 2. Now again, you can double check your answer here. What's 12x times x? Well, that's 12x squared And 12x times 2, well, that's 24x. It checks out. So we know that's my final answer. Now we've got 3 terms involved. So again, we need to figure out what all 3 terms have in common that we can factor out. 6, 12, 18. I recognize all of them can be divisible by 6. So I'm going to pull a 6 out. I have x to the third, x to the second, and x. They all have one x in common. So I'm going to start with 6x out front. So we have 6x squared. Okay, 6x to the third power. I take out a 6x, so I am just left with an x to the second power. Plus, I take 12 divided by 6. That leaves me with 2. If I take 1x away from an x to the second, I have 1x left over. 18, if I divide it out of 6, I'm left with 3. And if I take that x out, there's none left over. Let's double check this. Let's distribute again. 6x times x to the second, that'd be 6x cubed. 6x times 2x, that's 12x squared. And 6x times 3 plus 18x. It checks out. So yes, this is my final answer. Okay, let's try this example. 3xy to the second plus x to the second y. I'm going to write this one out just to help me out. 3x times y times y. That's what y to the second is. Plus 12, we have x times x plus y. I sometimes like to write that out to figure out what do we have in common. Well, 3 and 12, greatest common factor would be 3. And each term has 1x. So I can pull that x out here. And each term has 1y. So I can pull that y out here. Now, if I divided a 3 out, well, that takes care of that 3. I took an x out, I took a y out. I'm just left with 1y from the first set term, from this term. Plus, I divided 3 out of the 12, so I should be left with 4. Took an x away, took a y away, I'm left with just an x. So again, let's distribute back and let's see what we get. So 3xy times y, well, that's 3xy squared, plus 3xy times 4x, that would be 12x squared y. It checks out. There's my final answer. 6a squared b squared plus 18a. Greatest common factor would be 6a. Divide both out by 6. And they each have at least one a. So in the first term, I'd be left with a. B to the second plus 18 divided by 6 would be 3. Again, let's double check. Let's distribute it back. We would have 6a squared b squared plus 18a. It checks out. So these are bulletproof. You can double check your work every single time. Here's a new example that you may not have seen. But if you notice, in parentheses here is x plus 3. So all we need to do is do some rearranging here. The greatest common factor these both have is x plus 3. So we'll start by rewriting x plus 3, and then I can put together these outside terms, and so my second set would be 7 minus y. And if we FOIL that, it would look similar to if I were to distribute the top here. Let's take a look here. It looks like we have in parentheses a plus b, a plus b. So I'm going to rewrite a plus b first, and I'm going to put together y plus 5. Change colors here. All right, last one. Looks like we have 2 plus y and 2 plus y. Those match. So 2 plus y is the greatest common factor. I'm going to factor out front. And what we're left with is the outside terms. 3x minus 4. Your assignment can be found in the binder. Ask questions. When you finish the assignment, turn it in. You have a quiz to complete next.